بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Okay, so in today's lesson we start a new subject area, and so after discussing the topic of Al-Qadr, Imam al-Tahaawiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he then goes on to discuss a number of diverse topics in short sentences. So we'll start with the first of them, and this will take us through this lesson and also inshallah ta'ala in the next lesson as well. So in this statement, Imam al-Tahaawiyyah says, وَفِي دُعَاءِ الْأَحْيَاءِ وَصَدَقَاتِهِمْ مَنْفَعَةٌ لِلْأَمْوَاتِ. This means that in the supplication, in the dua that the living make, and in the charities that they give, there is benefit for the dead. There is benefit for the dead. So once again, وَفِي دُعَاءِ الْأَحْيَاءِ وَصَدَقَاتِهِمْ مَنْفَعَةٌ لِلْأَمْوَاتِ. That in the charities given by in the supplication made by the living and the charities given by them, there is benefit for the dead. So what we'll do here then is we'll go through a brief explanation from Sheikh Zayd al-Madkhali. Then we'll move to the explanation of Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, which is slightly longer, and then we'll move on to the detailed issues connected to this statement from Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh. So we'll go in that order inshallah. So Sheikh Zayd al-Madkhali rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that from the belief of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah is that we believe, that we have faith and that we believe that when the living make supplication and when they give charities, that by way of these supplications and charities, Allah brings about benefit for the dead, for their dead, meaning for their dead. And this is irrespective, the Shaykh says, as to whether the dead is a near relative in terms of blood relationships, or it is just simply someone from your brothers from amongst the Muslims, the believers in general. And irrespective of whether it is a male or a female, it makes no difference. Now obviously this issue here will be elaborated in more detail, and some of the details of this and also the difference amongst the scholars about this will elaborate a bit later. But from here the Shaykh says that when you give a charity from your wealth and then you give the reward of that charity to a deceased person, then that will reach that person and Allah will bring about benefit to that person by way of this charity. And likewise, if you make dua for him, if you make supplication for him or for the deceased, Allah will also likewise bring about benefit for that deceased person by way of your dua. This is from the belief of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, as has preceded, he says, and the evidence for the correctness of this and the fact that it is legislated, meaning to make dua and to give charity, is the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, إِذَا مَاتَ الْإِنسَانُ إِنْقَطَعَ عَنْهُ عَمَلُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثَةٍ. When a man dies, all of his action is cut off except from three roots. The first of them, إِلَّا مِنْ صَدَقَةٍ جَارِيَةٍ. The first is recurring charity. Charity that recurs, whose benefit continues and continues. أو علم ينتفع به, or knowledge by which benefit is being attained. أو ولد صالح يدعو له, or by way of a righteous son who supplicates for him, who makes dua for him. And the Shaykh says these three deeds are the deeds which will reach him, the rewards of which will reach him by the power and the might of Allah the Most High. These affairs, they reach the dead, and all of this is from the mercy of Allah to His servants and His benevolence to them. So this was the statement of Sheikh Zayd al-Madkhali, a brief commentary. And this brings us now to the statement of Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan. And so the Sheikh begins by saying, first of all, this topic, when we look at this topic, it really is a topic to do with the rulings of fiqh, the rulings of jurisprudence. And meaning this question as to, can we give charity? Can we supplicate on behalf of the dead? Does the reward reach them or not? Right? This is more of a fiqh issue, meaning a ruling of jurisprudence. And the scholars often make mention of this when they discuss the rulings of the janaiz, of the funerals and related issues, and they include this topic towards the end of that. However, it also has a connection to the topic of aqeedah. There is some connection to the topic of belief as well. So the Shaykh says, he first of all mentions the hadith that we just quoted, the hadith in which the Messenger of Allah, he said, when the son of Adam dies, all of his actions are cut off except from 3 roots. And then he mentioned recurring charity, knowledge which is being benefited from, or a righteous son who supplicates for him. Then he says, when a servant dies, obviously all of his actions are cut off, right? Because his ability to act now has been cut off. He is now in the barzakh. However, there are certain things which continue to benefit him, and they are those things which he himself was the cause of. He himself was the cause of whilst he was alive, right? So he did certain things, he was the cause of certain things, those things continue after his death, and so therefore he continues to benefit from them. So for example, recurring charity whose benefit continues, for example, the building of a masjid. He contributed to building of a masjid, or a school in which people are being taught. And so as long as benefit is being brought about by way of these things, then he will continue to accrue reward on the basis of that. So this is charity. Or by way of knowledge. This was the second thing mentioned in the hadith. So he maybe taught fiqh to somebody, he taught the rulings of the religion to somebody, maybe he taught aqeedah, the issues of creed, to somebody, and there are students who gathered around him, and all of this brings about reward for him. Or perhaps he might have authored a book by which the people benefited. And so all of this is from the knowledge which he taught and by which he will continue to benefit from after his death. And the third thing mentioned, the Shaykh says, or a righteous son who supplicates for him after his death. And here the Shaykh says that the son really is from the deeds of a man. Right? Your son or your offspring, your son, your daughter, really he or she is considered to be from your deeds. Why? Because this person got married, he was looking for chastity and safety in his religion by getting married, and he intended to have children, and righteous children, and so he had children, he raised them, he brought them up in a certain way, made them righteous, and so those children, they supplicate for him. And so because this child actually is from the deeds, the child is actually your deeds. He is your workings, because you are the cause, the sabab of bringing this child up in a certain way such that he supplicates for you. So that reward, his supplication for you, and in fact all of his deeds, they are from your deeds. And this is why we see in the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is when he said, "Inna atyaba ma akaltum min kasbikum." Indeed, the most pure and wholesome of that which you eat is whatever has come from your own earning, from your own striving. And indeed, wa inna awladakum min kasbikum. And indeed, your offspring, your children, they are from your earning. Yeah, they are from your earning. And in another hadith with a similar wording, innal walad min kasb al-walid, or kama qal, there's another hadith with a very similar wording, that indeed the son is from the earnings of the father. So this means that the righteous child who supplicates for his parents after his death, this dua, this supplication, the benefit of this reaches that person, and it is considered to be from his righteous deeds, meaning your offspring supplicating for you, that itself is from your righteous deeds, and so that continues to benefit you after death. Now the Shaykh says that that here we are speaking about dua, which is supplication, and obviously there is no difference about this. This is united upon because it is very clearly evidenced in the Quran and the Sunnah. But there are other affairs in which there is a difference of opinion. Now the Shaykh brings a verse in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, وَأَن لَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. This is Surah An-Najm, Surah 53, verse number 39. وَأَن لَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى, which means that man shall not have except what he himself strived for. Now, clearly, when we look at this verse, and we look at the verse in terms of what it's clearly expressing, the mantuq of the ayah, it means that we could take it to mean that the action of no other person will benefit a person, right? The benefit of no other person will benefit you. This is what we read apparently from the verse. It is what is being stated in the verse, except what you yourself were the cause of, right? So basically going back to the things that we mentioned earlier, that the action of no other person will benefit you except what you yourself were the cause of. In other words, this verse is general and negates everything. It negates that any other person can benefit you, but it is specified by those texts in which those things which you yourself were the cause of, even if they come from other people, they will benefit you, right? So, for example, the example of teaching somebody else, you teach somebody else knowledge, understanding in the religion, you admonish them, so they were righteous, their deeds will be of benefit to you. Why? Because you were the cause of that deed. There is a clear connection between you and that deed done by that person. You were the cause, and so therefore you deserve to be recompensed by that deed. So basically when we look at this verse, the verse is basically saying you will not benefit from any deed apart from your own. However, when we look at the other texts, like the hadith that we mentioned, then we find that there are certain things the Messenger ﷺ has informed us about, which are from the deeds of other people that will in fact benefit the dead person. And those specific things mentioned by the Messenger of Allah ﷺ basically are a specification of that verse. Right? They are a specification of that verse. They are an exception to certain things from coming under that general verse. Or basically, they can be included in the verse. Why? Because those deeds are actually from the striving of the person himself. But there are some examples which have got no connection to a person. For example, as we said, istighfar. When the believer seeks forgiveness for somebody else, he asks Allah to forgive somebody else, right? This is something that clearly benefits a dead person, but there's no connection between you and that person. Evidence for this is clearly in the Quran, is clear. The supplication in which it is said, رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا وَلِإِخْوَانِنَا الَّذِينَ سَبَقُونَا بِالْإِيمَانِ. O Allah, forgive us and for our brothers who have preceded us in faith. And likewise, Allah commands the Messenger, وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. seek forgiveness for your sin and for the believing men and the believing women. Now clearly this also incorporates the dead believing men and the believing women. So here is an action which has come from other than you, from somebody else besides you. You were not the cause of that action. That person freely of his own will, he made dua for you, and that dua will benefit you. So the point being now, the point that we're making is that verse وَأَن لَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى is general, and it establishes a principle that man will only benefit that which he himself did, which is correct and true. And then there are certain other elaborations of this, like in the hadith that mentioned the three things, right? Recurring charity, knowledge, and righteous offspring. Because they are from that person's deeds. He was the sabab of those deeds. So they are from his deed, they are from his striving. And then there are other things which actually have no connection to a person, like making istighfar, making dua, and so on and so forth, from the believers in general. The Shaykh continues and says, the Prophet ﷺ, he ordered the believers that when they bury the deceased, that they stand over his grave and they make dua, they ask Allah to forgive him, and they ask Allah to give him firmness when he's going to answer the questions. And likewise, he also informed that giving charity benefits the dead. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he informed him that his mother had died, and that if she had been alive, she would have given charity. So am I able to give charity on her behalf? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, yes. So a person can give charity on behalf of his deceased parents, and that will benefit them. Likewise, Hajj and also Umrah will benefit others, as we see in the evidences. The hadith one hadith in which one of the companions came and said, and the Prophet ﷺ said to the person, make Hajj first for yourself, then make Hajj on behalf of Shabrama. Right? So here this was a Hajj, you make it for yourself and then make it on behalf of the other person that was mentioned. And so here is another action that will benefit another person. Similarly, a woman came and she asked the Prophet ﷺ about doing Hajj on behalf of her mother, and that, she obviously the obligation of Hajj was due upon her, but she did not make Hajj. So can I make Hajj on her behalf? And the Prophet ﷺ said, yes, perform Hajj on behalf of your mother. So we can see here clearly then that all of these things, ad-du'a, supplication, asking for making istighfar for the deceased, asking Allah to forgive the deceased, and sadaqah, giving charity on behalf of the deceased, and doing Hajj and Umrah on behalf of the deceased, all of these are of benefit to the dead person, and all of them are from the action of another person. Right? These are from the actions of another person. So think about this. On the one hand, we have actions of a person that continue after his death, which he was the cause of. Like mentioned as we see mentioned in that hadith. When the son of Adam dies, his deeds are cut off except for 3. Then we have certain other deeds which occur from the believers in general, like dua, like al-istighfar, like the Hajj and the Umrah, and the giving of charity, which are not performed by the deceased, which he had no connection with. They likewise will benefit the dead person. Now the Shaykh goes on to say, however, there are factions of people, or there is a faction of people who exaggerated in this affair, and they began to say that the dead person will benefit from every single deed of every other person. Right? And so what they do is that certain people, they come and they bring 20, 30 people whom they hire to recite the Quran for the dead, for example, and they want the reward for reciting the Quran to go to this dead person. And the Shaykh says, the likes of these actions will not actually benefit the living person, nor will they benefit the dead person. Because here the one who's reading, he's taking a reward, he has an incentive to read, and he doesn't have any reward for this. And secondly, this affair is an innovation. Secondly, it's a bid'ah, it's an innovation. It has no basis, has no evidence. And the simple thing is that why not, instead of giving this money to these people, why don't you just give it straight to charity, which is an authentic sunnah way of benefiting the dead? Why are you doing something innovated, where you, for example, are paying some people, or you're just inviting to give them some dinner, for example? Why don't you just give the money or the food and give it to poor people and the needy, or give it in charity, and that will benefit the dead by textual evidence in the Quran and the Sunnah? Why are you doing an innovated deed when you could be doing it in accordance with the Sunnah and still achieve the same objective? So the Shaykh says that no doubt charity and righteous deeds benefit the dead, but not when they are done in an innovated way. When they are done in an innovated way, they do not benefit neither the living person, nor do they benefit the dead person. So this is the speech of Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan, and we'll continue with the elaboration of Sheikh Salih Al-Sheikh. So the Sheikh says that in this sentence, وَفِي دُعَاءِ الْأَحْيَاءِ وَصَدَقَاتِهِمْ مَنْفَعَةٌ لِلْأَمْوَاتِ, that in the supplications and the charities of the living, there is benefit for the dead. He says, the Shaykh, Imam Tahaawiyyah here is affirming the position of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, that the dead can benefit through the actions of the living. And that the dead, when he dies, his action is not cut off, meaning his action is not cut off completely and absolutely. Rather, he can still benefit by certain other deeds. And so he mentioned here at Tahawi, dua and sadaqah. Those are the two things that he mentioned specifically. He mentioned the supplication of the living person that benefits, and that charity also benefits in its general sense. Now, why has this topic been included? Because as we said earlier, this topic is really a topic to do with fiqh, with jurisprudence. And it has been included here in a book of Aqeedah. Now, why is it that this has been included here? We see that this was an issue in which there was some debate and discussion in the times gone past, and there were certain people like the Mu'tazila. They, from those who were rationalists, and they tried to reduce everything to reason and logic and rationale. And they used to basically deny certain texts, or they would make a ta'wil, they would make interpretations of those texts which were incorrect. And so these issues used to be raised in respect to certain issues, and it was spread that a dead person can never ever be benefited by a living person. And for that reason, the scholars of the Sunnah and Jama'ah, when they saw that clearly in the texts this position is contradicted by the text, that indeed a dead person can be benefited by the actions of the living, they stood and they basically began to refute this position, and to the degree where they even incorporated it within the text of Aqeedah. And another example similar to this, which is a more apparent example of a ruling in jurisprudence, is the issue of wiping over the socks. The wiping over the socks was denied and rejected by certain groups of people. It's rejected by the Rafidah. And so the scholars you find in certain books of Aqeedah, they will mention wiping of the socks. Why? Because it became a hallmark of difference between the people of the Sunnah and the people who deny and oppose the Sunnah. So here we see this issue that on its surface it doesn't appear to be connected to Aqeedah, because it is connected merely to the issue of dua and the benefit of that dua. But and in general we find it mentioned in the books of funerals and things like that. But here it's present because of that reason, that the innovators opposed clear texts in the Quran and the Sunnah which indicate otherwise. So now there are numerous issues to do with this, and there are 5 issues altogether. In the remainder of this lesson we will try to discuss maybe 2 of them and finish the remainder in the next lesson. So as for the first issue, the first issue is that the dead benefiting from the striving of the living. Right? The dead benefiting from the striving of the living. So notice here that there's no connection between the dead person and the living person. There's no connection between the dead person's own action which continue after his death. We are speaking specifically here of the dead benefiting from not his own striving, but the striving of the living. This issue, that this is indeed correct and true, and that the living do benefit the dead by their own striving, is a matter of agreement amongst the scholars of the Sunnah and the Jama'ah, from the scholars, from the people of Hadith, from the jurists, from the people of Tafsir, all of these different all of these different specialities, scholars in all of these different specialities, scholars, the Imams of the Sunnah, the Imams in Hadith, the Imams in Tafsir, right, in all these different fields, they are all agreed that this is proven by the Quran and the Sunnah, that the dead person can benefit from the striving of someone else. And they are agreed upon 2 things there is unanimous agreement upon. Right? There are 2 things which are unanimously agreed upon. So the first of them is the issue of dua, the issue of supplication. And this is dua that a living person makes. It is from his striving. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He responds to this dua. And this is why we see that it is legislated to make salatul janazah, to pray the janazah prayer. When we look at the janazah prayer is unlike the normal 5 daily prayers, because the janazah prayer really is a form of supplication. It is an etiquette of supplication. When we look at the janazah prayer, it actually tells us the ideal way to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's look at the janazah prayer. The janazah prayer, you begin, you make takbir, and then you recite, you say Al-Fatiha. Now, there is no other opening supplication which is legislated, unlike the normal regular salah. Right? There's no opening supplication. You go straight into the Fatiha. This is what is known and related from the Sunnah. And so you begin by the Fatiha, in which there is praise of Allah, mention of His names and attributes, and supplication for guidance, and so on and so forth. And then you make takbir, and then you send salat and salam upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then after you've made salat and salam upon the Messenger of Allah, you then make takbir, and then you start making the supplication. And this really shows you the etiquette of dua. How does a believer make dua? When he makes dua for anything, for any need, he praises Allah, he sends salat and salam upon the Messenger, then he asks his need. And this we see represented clearly in the Salatul Janazah, which is why the Salatul Janazah, there is no prostration, there is no ruku', there is no adhan. It's different from the normal salah. Because that salah, normal salah is obviously, it's many other things. It is dua, it is praise of Allah, it is ruku', it is sujood, it has so many other things part and parcel of it. It is an act of worship in itself. But the Salatul Janazah really is a form of dua, it is a form of shafa'ah, it is a form of interceding on behalf of that person with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it teaches us the etiquette of dua. It is from the adab, from the mannerisms of dua. And so it shows that in any dua you wish to make to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you praise Allah, you make hamd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then you send salat upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you call for whatever you want to call, whatever you want to make dua for. So this is an issue of agreement between all of the scholars that a person can make dua for the dead person, it will benefit him. Likewise, also from agreement is the issue of sadaqah, the issue of charity. When a person gives charity by way of wealth, and he spends that wealth in order to benefit the dead, then this also is an issue of agreement between the people of the Sunnah, from the scholars of Hadith and Tafsir and the Imams of the Sunnah. All of them are agreed upon this. So in general, they are agreed upon these two things. And there are some differences between them in some of the detailed issues pertaining to this, but in general, they are agreed upon this. So this is the first type of deeds that they are agreed upon, dua and sadaqah. Now, the second type that they are also agreed upon, so the first group, the first type of things comes, dua and sadaqah come into the first type. The second type that they're agreed upon is, as we said earlier, those things which the dead person himself was a cause of whilst he was alive. Right? So this goes back to the hadith that we mentioned earlier. And so the Shaykh brings a number of other hadiths as well, which are also from the same angle. The hadith of the Prophet when he said, "Man da'a ila huda, man da'a ila huda, kana lahu min al-ujur مثل أجور من اتبعه لا ينقص ذلك من أجورهم شيئا أو لا ينقص ذلك من أجورهم شيئا." That whoever calls to guidance, then he will have the reward equal to the reward of whoever followed him, and that will not diminish anything from their reward. So if you call to guidance, then everyone who followed you in guidance, you will get their reward as well. And nothing will be taken away from their reward in following you. Right? So this clearly is an indication that a person who invited people to right guidance and they followed him, and he died, he will continue benefiting from the consequences of those people being guided by way of him. And then another hadith also in Sahih Muslim, "Man sanna fil Islami sunnatan hasana kana lahu ajruha wa ajru man alima biha ila yawm al-qiyamah." Anyone who instituted a good practice in Islam, he will have the reward for it and the reward of whoever acted upon it until the day of judgment. And obviously this is not referring to innovations in the religion, but it is referring to any practice which already has a basis in the Sharia. And in fact, this hadith and a similar worded hadith, the incident that took place behind which these words were said was that a group of people came who were impoverished and in need, and the Prophet ﷺ encouraged the people to give to them. And so a man stood up and he went to his house, rushed to his house, and he gathered a huge handful or a clothful of possessions which contained wealth and perhaps jewelry or whatever else, and he brought it and he put it on the ground like this. So then, after seeing this man do what he did, other people began to get up and they went and they began to contribute likewise. So this man who, this was a good practice, this was the sunnah, a sunnah hasana. He did something which became a path and a way that was followed by other people. However, the thing that he did itself was not a bid'ah in the religion, because giving charity is something that is already established. But he gave it in a way and a form that hadn't been done by the people, hadn't been done. He brought it, he did it in a novel way. He brought half his wealth, he brought a large amount of his wealth and threw it, like this. And so other people saw this and were encouraged to do likewise. So this is the meaning and the intent of the hadith. It is not, we know that many people use it to argue for bid'ah hasana, for which there is no such thing, that is fallacious and false. But this is an example of a person who instituted a good practice in which he was followed in, and the consequences of that goodness will continue to benefit him in his grave. So this is also agreed upon, that these are things that he was the cause of in his life. And similarly, going back to the hadith, a righteous son, a righteous offspring who makes dua for him. All of these things are agreed upon. All of these things agreed upon. Likewise, there are certain other things which are also agreed upon, which are mentioned in the hadith, for which there are evidences for. For example, the umrah and the hajj, things like that. The issues which are agreed upon. So this now brings us to the second issue, which is that the scholars, as we said, there are some minor issues of detail and differences, and so the scholars have differed over one category of actions. Now, as we've already said, all the scholars are agreed upon dua and sadaqah. Sadaqah is something which is to do with wealth, right? It is to do with wealth. It is not related to physical bodily actions, right? The salah is a physical bodily action. Fasting is a physical bodily action. There are many other acts of worship which are like that. So with respect to sadaqah, there's no disagreement. But with respect to the actions which involve a person's body, like for example reciting the Quran, like for example performing the prayer, like for example fasting, like for example making hajj, because there are bodily elements in the worship of hajj. In all of these things, the issue arises, do these bodily actions benefit that deceased person or not? Right? And so the scholars have differed with respect to those types of actions. So some of the scholars have said, yes, even those actions, the benefit of them, it reaches the dead person. And some other scholars have said, no, the benefit of those actions do not reach the dead person. So, the first position, that yes, even these actions, they benefit the dead person, this is a view held by the majority of the righteous Salaf. And this has been ascribed to them by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, and likewise Ibn al-Qayyim and others, and they use the word the jumhur, meaning the majority of these scholars. Likewise, this is the view of al-Imam Abu Hanifa and al-Imam Ahmad rahimahumullah, and a group of other scholars from the people of Hadith and Athar. All of them are of the view that a dead person will benefit from any of the deeds which a living person performs, and who gives the reward for those deeds to that dead person. And so the scholars amongst this group, they say any good deed, any righteous deed that is done by a Muslim and given to another Muslim, dead Muslim, another person who's dead, it will benefit him. Right? So this is the view of some of the scholars. And the second view is the view held by Imam Malik and Shafi'i and others, and they say that a dead person will not benefit from the bodily acts of worship in which there is, for example, the prayer, for example, or reciting the Quran or fasting and what is similar to that. Rather, these type of actions will not be of benefit. The only things that will benefit him is those affairs which are connected to wealth, meaning giving sadaqah, giving charity, or in which wealth is connected in one way or another. And the reason they say this is because no evidences have been established which indicate that those other things will benefit. Right? And so therefore we take the asl or the foundation that those things will not be of benefit to the living person. So this is the end of the second issue, and I think we'll conclude our lesson there today, because we'll leave the remaining material for the second part of this lesson, inshallah ta'ala. So we'll conclude there for today, and we'll take this up inshallah in the next lesson. We'll end there. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.